Well, good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of the Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul DeLigro, your host, and my guest today is Phillip Wylie. So, Phillip, normally, like people that come on the show, they have like a title. Well, you've got like 50 of them. You're an ethical hacker. You're an educator. You're a podcaster. You're an author, among other things. You know, a long-time industry, technology, security expert. So, welcome to the show, Phillip.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be joining you.
Yeah. So really the topic for today is ethical hacking, right? And we can touch on other things as well, but that's obviously with security being such a big issue today for everybody. There's not a customer we have, like maybe 10 years ago, wasn't that front and center, but now everyone's worried about security and cybersecurity. And you've been in that field for a long time. Let's back up a little bit. How'd you get into security and all that? Give a little history of yourself.
Yeah. So if you want the way back, actually, when I graduated high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, being a powerlifter, my friends told me, yeah, you should be a pro wrestler. So I went to wrestling school for a while and wrestled for a couple of years.
Wow. That's cool.
Went to the wrestling school with The Undertaker. And during my time as a wrestler, I wrestled a 750-pound bear.
Wow. Holy crap. So, like Killer Kowalski had his own wrestling school. I'm sure you remember Killer Kowalski from when I was a kid. Yes. Where'd you go to school, by the way? Wrestling school. I went
to a couple different schools. The first one I went to was in downtown Dallas at Doug's Gym, and it was ran by General Skandar Akbar was his wrestling name. So that's where I started out at, and was going to school and met up with some other people that were going to this other school, and they were getting matches and stuff. So I ended up going to the other school for a while. It was a recommendation of someone that was working in the industry. So I went over there and went to school there. It was an interesting experience because whenever going into wrestling school, you always wonder, because back in the 80s, it wasn't out yet that it was fake. I'm not going to say scripted.
No way. It's not really fake, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, but when you're going to school, you wonder how long it's going to be before they tell you. So I thought you're going to go to wrestling school and get the tar beat out of you, and maybe they'll tell you when do you find out when you actually wrestle or what. But coming in the door, they were very open that it wasn't, an actual match. So they decided who was going to win, and you're supposed to pull your punches and that type of thing.
Yeah. So did you actually ever wrestle professionally?
Yes.
You did it. Oh, okay. So I was back on your...
And on my YouTube, and on my YouTube channel, I got some of the matches. My dad used to stay up on Saturday nights, record the matches, and I've got several matches on my YouTube channel. So I've wrestled the Road Warriors. For people not familiar with the Road Warriors, they wrestled in the WWF, now WWE, as the Legion of Doom. I wrestled the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, 2/3 of the Fabulous Freebirds. Let's see who else. Mick Foley, he wrestled in Dallas as Cactus Jack. That was kind of when he hadn't been in it that long. He was really starting to take off and kind of develop his own style, because a lot of people weren't doing all the jumping off high objects. He was kind of the one that would do that. He would jump off the ropes off into the floor onto someone and that type of thing. So yeah, those are some of the people. It was an interesting experience.
Can you make any money at that? That's what I want. Obviously, if you're the star of the stars, you can, but the regular everyday guys that's out grunting, what kind of money can you make doing that?
When I was doing it, it wasn't that much. So the first time I wrestled, I got paid like $75, and then wrestling in Dallas, and this was like in the late 80s. So they got down to where they're paying $25 per match. So I'd make $25 to go down there. And a lot of guys we refer to as jobbers or job boys. You were there to make the good guys or the stars look good, because they would have all these matches where they just totally, rip through someone, building up to a match with one of the other stars. And so we were there to make them look good.
Sure.
So some of those guys were probably making good money back then, and they're really making good money nowadays. There's some of these independent circuits that people wrestle in that I don't think they're making that much, because like the WWE taking over just about everything really hurt the wrestling industry as a whole. So if you're going to go make money nowadays, you have to go to, WWE or AEW or one of those federations to be able to make money. Used to, there were several, kind of local federations in different territories that people could go to wrestle and making a living off of it. But you hear some of the stories of some of those guys that stuck with it and stuck it out, how they were sleeping in cars and barely scraping by. And then, they hit it big with the WWE, but you can make money at it. But, I kind of got out of it because I got married and I needed, a job with insurance and benefits, something more stable and where I would be home,
Yeah. Those damn responsibilities, man. Wife and kids.
I don't really regret it, though. I look back on it. I see some of the stories of like Steve Austin. I actually knew him. He used to work out at the gym where I worked out at in Denton, Texas, before he got into wrestling. He finished up his college career and college football career. And we used to work out at the same gym, and he came to see my first match in Dallas. So that was kind of interesting, but, so I had to get something more stable. And so I ended up going to, I worked in all sorts of jobs and ended up, going to a trade school to learn AutoCAD, become a CAD drafter. And so CAD drafting is where I found out about, system admin work. And so then I taught myself how to build computers, took a Novell NetWare course, and then moved over into a sysadmin role, did that for a little over 6 years. And then in 2004, I moved into my first security role, doing like network security.
Sure.
We're also doing vulnerability scans, risk assessments. And then we had a new CISO come into the company, and he kind of changed up the group, put us in different areas. And so I got put on the AppSec team, and through application security, I was managing our third-party pen tests, because back then, most companies did have their own pen testers. That was usually outsourced through contractors.
Yeah,
which has
most
changed
companies
a lot
don't
nowadays.
even have them today, though, right? I mean,
it's getting a lot better. It's done a lot better. But I managed those pen tests, and so when I got laid off in 2012, I applied for a job with this company as a consultant doing pen testing, and so that's kind of how I got my start.
Nice, very nice. So you're looking at like 12, 14 years now. You've been kind of in this role ish. Right.
Yeah. I've been in the offensive security side for about 12 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice. So, again, you consider yourself an ethical hacker. Explain to the folks out there what that even means. Let's get some definitions out of the way here.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things too that kind of frustrates some people that work in as pen testers, that you have to differentiate, because you don't have to differentiate if someone can pick locks and break into houses, they don't, you don't ever hear of an ethical locksmith, but basically it's telling that we have permission to test the security of the organization, that we're using our hacking skills for good, and we're not using it to, try to break into a competitor's systems or, some other nation state systems. That we have the permission to assess those systems using the same type of techniques that a real world threat actor might use. And everyone always worried about the hackers, they're worried about being hacked. So this is the only way you can truly detect whether you've got vulnerabilities that could be exploited that would lead to a breach. And so this is something that's become more popular. When I was getting started out in 2012, I believe PCI was still around, but it really wasn't gaining ground. And PCI compliance, payment card industry data security standard, really drove the need for pen testing, because I remember I used to go to local meetups like in 2013. There'd only be one or two of us pen testers there. But now fast forward to 2024, you'll see a bunch of pen testers in the room, because, PCI has really driven that. It helped some people wake up and not necessarily maybe need it for PCI, but realize the only way to be secure is to have pen tests done. And then of course, follow up by remediating those vulnerabilities. But that's really what kind of drove things and helped build that industry. It's amazing how it's grown. I've worked at US Bank at the time I was there. We had probably about 13 pen testers on staff.
Wow.
Bank of America now has their own pen testers. Capital One, also like State Farm Insurance. So a lot of companies are starting to get their own pen testers.
Yeah. I mean, as a pen tester, I would think staying ahead of the curve has got to be the toughest challenge, right? Because the bad guys, they're always innovating and evolving into other things, right? So as an ethical hacker, pen tester, however you want to, label yourself or your group, how do you stay ahead of it? What are
Just following the latest research, keeping up with the latest CVEs and O-days that are released. And that's the kind of the difference. There are some pen testers that are highly skilled that they're finding some of these 0 days. They're finding some of these vulnerabilities because some of these vulnerabilities we see get released. It's not always the bad guys finding them. It could be, pen testers or security researchers that found out how these vulnerabilities could be exploited. So it's not always them. So it's going to conferences like DEF CON, staying up to date with the latest research. So for me, one of my big resources is X, formerly Twitter. A lot of researchers will post on Twitter about or X about their latest exploit they discovered, as well as anyone that's discovered O-days that threat actors were using. They communicate it that way. So just being involved in the community, there's different Discord servers that are associated with different cybersecurity groups, as well as consulting companies, like some of the well-known, very good, high-quality pen test companies like Trusted Sec. They have their own Discord server, as well as Black Hills Information Security Group. So the security community is very open and sharing. So it's pretty easy to stay plugged in and find the folks to follow. It's when you're initially starting out, finding those group of people to follow and those companies to follow.
Yeah, and I would think knowledge is key, right? I mean, if you're out on an island, it's very hard to learn. But if you have a group of people that you can learn from, of the latest and greatest technologies, and I would think that'd be a big benefit. No?
Yeah, you really have to. And there's a lot of these folks too that you can follow on YouTube that post videos on how to do the different techniques and sharing about the different research and stuff. So yeah, you really have to keep up with it. And that's one of the areas, all areas of security, you really have to keep up with this stuff. But, I've worked on the defensive side and then worked on the offensive side. And for me, the offensive side was harder to keep up with, to keep your skills up to that level, to be able to test at the level needed.
Yeah. And you had mentioned earlier, I mean, do you think most companies, I should say this, most good-sized companies have their own pen testing teams now?
I think a lot of them do, but I think there's probably a small percentage that's still outsourcing that. And so even some of the bigger companies will also use consultants. Sometimes, some banks, they may not have someone internally that can pen test ATMs. So they bring in a consulting company to test those ATMs.
Yeah, so we actually, I work for an IT consulting company, and that's one of the services we provide. We provide a pen testing option for customers that they want us. We can come in and provide that service for them, So, and what are some of the emerging technologies that you're seeing in ethical hacking, that excite you? Like tools that are making your life a lot easier.
What's making, not necessarily a tool specific, but with the availability and accessibility of AI now is really helping, because you're able to use generative AI like ChatGPT to help create scripts and help with things. So that's been a huge help there. And I really look forward to seeing how the tools evolve. Yeah. Because, when pen testing started out, you didn't have vulnerability scanners or tools that made like Metasploit that made it easy to exploit your targets. So as these type of tools start to integrate AI, I see a lot of good there. And there's some companies that automate some of the pen testing. Sure. I don't think it's completely been replaced yet. That's really when you're going to need to get to the general artificial intelligence, because your normal AI uses machine learning, and you have to train it with these large learning models for it to be able to do things. You have to train it. But once we get to generative artificial intelligence, then it'll be able to learn on its own once it gets, because currently AI is not going to be able to find a 0 day. It takes the creativity of a human, but as that evolves.
But if it can accelerate the process and get you, say, 75% of the way there, right? Getting all that legwork out of the way. So you just remind me
It's just like I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But it's just like vulnerability scanners. If you didn't have a vulnerability scanner, it would take you a lot longer to test. And so, there's some tools out there too. One of them I forget the name of. It's something Copilot, but it's a Copilot built exclusively for defenders. So you can go in and type in, I need to do this, and it kind of helps you. So you're able to take people that are more junior, they're just getting started out, help accelerate them. And this is only going to improve.
Yeah. You just reminded me of an article I just read, will AI, and this is kind of not related, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Can AI help democracy? So now we're talking politics, but I thought about it and I kind of had two visions of this. Like, I'm like, yeah, it could help democracy, but if if everyone can slant the data the way they want it to help their position, that's where, politics come in, right? Like, if you can slant it to help you meet your agenda, then it won't be good. But if it can be neutral, then I think it could be good. I mean, what do you think? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just if it's neutral, and then even the person, even going back to AI that we're using now, sometimes there's biases because whoever created that AI, this may be what they think is fact, and not necessarily saying they're trying to mislead someone, but this is based on their opinion. So there's some biases in AI. So I think there'd be a lot of work to get it to be neutral. But yeah, but the thing I kind of fear is just creating fake news and creating all this different stuff to sway people. And, because it's such a mudslinging effort these days with politics. So,
it's crazy.
But it would be really nice.
Yeah.
But your concept is a good idea, because one of the things I could see is what if there's some Senate bill such and such, you're able to feed it in there and it's able to summarize it for you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, a lot of us people go into the polls not taking time to research every Senate bill that's on the ballot. So I think there's a lot of good.
Yeah. I got to admit, it's a little frustrating for me when you go to vote and there's all these questions on there that didn't even know were on this. So here you are at the ballot box trying to read something that is one sentence. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, because you don't know the fine print, right?
Yes. We don't know the lawyer speak.
Yeah. And whose agenda, I always refer back to the Barry Scheck. You're old enough to remember the O.J. Simpson trial. When, garbage in, garbage out theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's relevant today, right? With this AI stuff, is if these AI engines are only as good as the information they have in them. And if you put inaccurate information, like you said, biased information in there, that's what they're going to think.
Yes.
So if someone, guy like you kind of sound like you kind of eased into it over the years, right? Just kind of one job after another. You think that's a typical way people are getting into it today? Or is a young kid coming out of college, does he have the opportunity to go into ethical hacking immediately? Or is that something that has to be a learned skill or a learned field?
You have to learn the skill, but people, companies bringing you in without knowing that is a little more rare, but someone can come right into it because, when I got started, that really wasn't an option. I mean, I'm sure there was some ethical hacking going on, maybe in the government space or something, or some other areas that we weren't aware of, but the background that I had helped me. But this brings up a good question, because I had that sysadmin background, which helped me more than anything with my ethical hacking. And, I have had students before come up and ask me, if I want to be as good of a pen tester as you, do I have to spend that much time? And it's all a matter of the time and effort you're willing to put into it. They don't have to be a sysadmin, but you need to, be sysadmin level on the different operating systems.
Yeah.
Because if you get command line access, you have to understand the operating system to hack it. So
what do you do? And this is getting into ethics again, right? I mean, because not all people are 100% ethical. They may think they are, but they're not. What do you do, or what have you done if you come across some real sensitive data? Like, I'll throw an example out there. Like, you see that there's a lawsuit, a sexual harassment suit against one of the executives that no one knew about, and you come across that, right? What do you do with that information?
Yeah, if you come across, there's, responsible disclosure is kind of the same thing. If you find some vulnerability, you report it to the company that it affects. One of the things I'd recommend too is looking at a website called disclose.io. And they have a lot of information on responsible disclosure, as well as some of the other bug bounty platforms on how to disclose that information to the organization it affects. But nowadays you have to really be careful, because if you found it because you were hacking through a system, you could find yourself in some trouble there. But there are cases where systems could error. You could be using an application online and it errors out, and maybe it's exposing database information that shouldn't.
Right. Yeah. Unbelievable. So what advice would you what advice would you give someone that says, "Hey, I want to get into ethical hacking"? I mean, because it's like, like careers are very interesting things, right? You probably started as a pro wrestler and now you're here. You know, um, if someone was thinking about getting into it, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, if you're interested, what I would do first of all is maybe find some local conferences, uh, look at some YouTube channels out there, and just kind of see if you're interested in it. Maybe take a course, because the thing that's interesting about it is it may sound interesting, but a good example was someone I worked with at a bank. So we worked together. When he started out, he was on the help desk. He was taking some digital forensics courses through like the SANS Institute. He'd been through several of these. His career goal was to be a digital forensics analyst. So he's taking this. He decided to take a pen testing course and fell in love with it. So I'd really say to people out there, I would check out all the different options. If you go to some of these conferences, they'll have like some workshops. They'll have presentations on the different types of technologies there is in cybersecurity. And other great learning resources is Try Hack Me and Hack the Box. These are online learning resources. TCM Academy is also another one that's low price and more affordable for folks. You get into courses through like SANS Institute. These are courses that you need to be working for a company that pays for those courses, because it's over $8,000 per course.
Oh, wow.
And so I don't know very many people that are paying out of pocket for SANS courses, because I mean, that's a lot of money.
I was going to say that can add up quick too if you've taken several courses, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So okay, now we get a little bit to the fun part. You got to have some war stories, right? Now you don't have to name names. Obviously, we don't want you to get murdered or sent to jail, but what, any good stories out there, hacking stories that you can share with us again?
Sure. Yeah, there is one I like to share, and this is one that goes back to why companies need to take remediation seriously. I was doing this web application pen test, and this was from the internet. So I was running my scans, and I saw that it might be vulnerable to SQL injection vulnerability. And SQL injection vulnerabilities, sometimes you can inject data into the database, and sometimes you can actually do things that reveal the content of the database. You're actually able to go in and read it remotely. And in some cases, you can get like command line access, get system control over that. And so I ran that scanner, and it come up and said it could be possible that. So I was using another tool called SQL Map to test and validate if it was an actual SQL injection, if what the risks were with it. And so I managed to get command line access, because they had XP command shell enabled. And so with Microsoft SQL servers, XP command shell allows command line access to that system. And a lot of times it's used by administrators, but you should definitely block this from being done from the internet or disable when you're not using it. So I was able to get command line access, dump the password hash, cracked it in like 30 seconds or less.
Oh, wow.
And the password was password all lowercase and the number 1. Okay. So the scope was only for this one application, so I could not go any further. Typically on a network pen test, or a pen test with a more open scope, I would have tried to see what I could, do lateral movement, access other systems. But whenever I wrote the report up and gave it to the customer, they came back and said, "Oh, this is a development system. We're going to file a risk acceptance." And so risk acceptance either gives you a period of time to remediate it, or you're accepting the risk that you're not going to remediate it all. And because it was a development system, they opted to not remediate. And the thing they were taking risk there is a bad guy, a malicious hacker was to hack into that system. They're not going to stop just there. They're going to go on to other systems. Password reuse is really bad. This is like in 2015. So I guarantee you that password 1 was used as an admin password across other systems in the organization. So if a threat actor got that, they would get in and they would have access to whatever they wanted to and whatever sensitive data. And even when we look at production environments, sometimes there is actual real data in there. It could be maybe dated a little bit, but it could be still actual data in dev environments. So this is one of those things that we need to really be careful about: password reuse, password strength, and also remediating your vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So actually just reminded me of something. I mean, I think we all went through it where we had like our favorite passwords and we used them for everything or variations of it. What do you think of those password programs that are like, I use LastPass, right? And
Y-
I don't know any of my own passwords anymore. I let it auto generate and all that. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with that 100% to use the password generation function of your password manager. And that's definitely a way to go because a lot of people reuse passwords and then you try to make them more difficult. So for me, I at least have a 20 character password, at least 20
Wow. Okay.
characters, and I let it generate it because if you don't have to remember it, it could be long as that
Yeah.
system would allow.
Now that you mentioned, I haven't counted, but I think LastPass will do something about that. I don't know what their number of characters is, but it's probably 20 with asterisks and numbers, caps, lowercase, all that good stuff. But yeah, I've gotten away from trying to, keep an Excel spreadsheet or a Word doc with passwords. That's just because if someone gets in your system and finds that, you're done, right?
Yes. And that's a typical thing that pen testers and threat actors will do because I've got a friend of mine that's an ethical hacker, a pen tester that one of his favorite methods is going through the shares and seeing what he can find. I mean, he's done pen tests before where he's found where people stored their own bank account information on a share within an organization and they didn't think they just expected that no one would be able to access that data. So yeah, that's a common method. And there's some of these hacks sometimes that really weren't advanced hacks. It was something simple like a cloud share being open and someone got access to that information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good advice. So from a security measure, I know a lot of our customers are starting to, multi-factor authentication. And what are some of the things that people can do to help them? So basic stuff, like obviously, a password program is going to help, some sort of a dual factor or multi-factor authentication. What are some other things companies can do to help defend themselves?
Yeah. Another thing too is, making sure that, like segmenting your network. So if you have something like video cameras or even, if you have your televisions connected to show slides and stuff, put
Yep.
those on a different network. Cause if you put them on a different subnet, it makes it a little more difficult. Make sure you're changing default usernames and passwords. And there's some tools out there too. Make sure that your employees, whenever they're working outside of the workplace, that they're using a VPN.
Yeah.
Train them to use that because this is, and one of the things too, I think really companies need to educate their employees to help them be more secure in general. So if they're more secure at home, because you hear about some of these bring your own device hacks or something where someone hacks someone's device. They had their device home, they took it to work and, were hacked because of that. So make sure you're teaching people, beyond your security awareness, teach them to operate securely using VPNs because in a coffee shop, someone could do like an evil twin attack. If you're not using a VPN, they can set up an access point.
Yeah.
The same name as the Starbucks access point. And if you've got your Wi-Fi settings to automatically connect to that access point, it's going to connect to whatever is the strongest signal. So if an attacker is in that coffee shop, if they're going to be closer than the access point in the ceiling, then they're able to hijack that session. So using VPNs are very important.
Yeah. Good to know. I know I just went on a trip to Costa Rica and I didn't even think anything of it. I had my laptop with me and doing a little bit of work and I couldn't connect. I had to call the company and say, hey man, you got to make an exception for me. And so, but it did its job, right? It blocked me. I was in a foreign country. It blocked me from accessing the network. And once they recognized it was me, they said, okay. But that, at least I know it did its job, which made me feel good.
Yeah, it's good. But that's the scary thing sometimes, even when you get in places, if you're ever at an airport or somewhere and you notice you're automatically connected to Wi-Fi and you didn't do that, some carriers will do that to cut down on the cost of the calls. That way they're just using Wi-Fi instead. And if you're in some public location like an airport, they will set up access points. But the scary thing about that is someone could still set up a access point that looks like an AT&T access point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do worry about that when you're in an airport and there's thousands of people around and everyone's trying to access the network. I'm always a little nervous of what am I connecting to? And so I try to do very little at airports, to be honest with you. Just if I have to jump on something, I will, but I try to just not connect if I can stand it, So, well, what else is going on with you in the future here? Now, are you working on your own right now? You have your own pen test or ethical hacking business?
No, actually, I'm between jobs. I got laid off. I was affected by a layoff back in February. So I'm actually talking to some companies and have a couple strong leads there. But for me, one of the things when it comes to jobs, I like to find something that has kind of a security evangelism part to it, because I do a lot of conference speaking. And when you speak at a lot of conferences, that can get really expensive, because last year I spoke at 18 conferences in person. And so if you're coming out of pocket for all that, that adds up pretty quick. And it's just one of my strengths is speaking at conferences and teaching. So that's one of the reasons I like to work for companies like that. It's a way for me to bring a better value to the company and use my strengths.
I would absolutely. I mean, I think too many companies sit on their hands and do nothing. I know it's kind of a blunt statement, but I see it all the time where they just get a paycheck, they do the job. I like guys like you that are out promoting the industry, promoting what we do, trying to help people. And quite honestly, I'm not just saying this because you're a guest on the show. I think any company would be lucky to have you, man. You'd be the prototype employee, I think. Some people understand. Some companies, I've worked for banks before and got fussed at one time because I was in a Vox article that they did an article on white hat hacking. And it's just about ethical hacking. It was nothing to do with any of our techniques or anything we did internally, but that was just kind of their way. And if you spoke at a conference, then you would have to send your presentation to legal. And so, yeah, they make it kind of difficult, but yeah, it's definitely companies. I think, in my opinion, a good example I like to share is you look at Walmart. They've got a pretty good security team there, and they host their own conference each year. They host their own conference. So whenever I see a company like that and I see they got some of these talent that not only speaking at conferences, they're doing some of this research and finding these things, I'm going to feel more secure doing business with them, knowing that they got the security expertise there, because not every company has it. Either they don't have the budget to hire the people or the budget to hire the right kind of people. So. Very good. Well, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Phillip, how would they do that?
The best way is through LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I just message me on LinkedIn or connect with me and message me. I'm also on X or Twitter. You can find me there. I answer my DMs there, but LinkedIn's going to be easier. Is a better way to contact me.
Very good. Well, best of luck with the search. I'm sure you've got a lot of options available to you, a guy with your talent level and personality, I would think. Plus, you're bigger than all these guys. Just like threaten them. What have you resorted to that at all?
I can do physical security too. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So, well, great. On that, we'll kind of finish up on that note. Phillip, enjoyed having you on. And this is a hot topic, obviously, and really enjoyed it. You had some good stories, and best of luck in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And not only was it fun to talk about cybersecurity, but I also love connecting with fellow podcasters, because
that's right. Great reminder. That's a good segue. I forgot to mention that you do have your own podcast. What's the name of it? Where can people go find it?
It's the Phillip Wylie Show.
Okay.
It can be found on YouTube, Spotify, any of your favorite platforms, but it's only available on video through Spotify and YouTube. But then it's available on all the other major platforms, Apple, even iHeartRadio.
Yep. Yeah. I think I know this is published on like 20 different platforms, 20 of the audio streaming platforms, but just YouTube, we've got the YouTube channel. So, well, awesome. Well, Phillip, thanks again for being on the show. I'm glad we got a plug for your podcast. That was in my notes and I forgot. I apologize for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
And so that's for another edition of Business Brains and Bottom Line Podcast. And that's a wrap until next time.